Hello and welcome to liveconfident.com. And in today's live stream I'm doing part 4 of a 5-part sequence, which is all about approach and introduce. 5 stages from that little piece of life which says you're in this position, I've seen somebody I want to approach and talk to. Whatever scenario you're in, whether it's at a social event, whether it's in a business context, you see somebody you want to talk to or you need to talk to for a business connection, and you're getting from here to here where you're actually in a conversation with them. And that in-between little bit can be the hardest thing in the world to do when you have social anxiety or you have strong shyness. So this is all about getting from here to here. And we do it in 5 stages. Now that sounds quite a lot for just a process that takes a couple of seconds in reality. But it's not like, well, here's stage 1, we take half a minute on this, and then stage 2, half a minute here. And no, it's not like that. There's a lot of description to this. There's a lot of working it out and thinking it through in your mind. But in reality, when you run this strategy, it just takes seconds, especially when you get familiar with it and you've practiced it and you know how to do it, and you can do it at an unconscious level. Just like when you learn to drive a car, if you've learned to drive a car. So in the beginning, and just like anything else, when you're learning to do something, you're thinking about everything, aren't you? Every move you make, if you're driving, you're learning to drive, you're thinking about everything. Do I look in the mirrors now? Do I indicate? What do I do here? It's all a conscious process. But as you practice it and get more familiar and become a practiced in it and skilled at it, it moves to the unconscious level, and your unconscious takes over the process, and you can do it without even thinking about it. Well, this is the same. So just a really quick recap. We started at stage 1. We're in that position where we've seen somebody, we've had that impulse in our mind, I want to talk to that person that I've just seen in this room. Whether it's across the room or it's just a couple of tables away, you've seen somebody you'd like to talk to or you want to talk to, and you've had that initial impulse, that initial thought, you've seen the person, I want to talk to them. Now is part 1, is getting moving. Because where we usually fall down and make the mistake, not literally fall down, but where we usually go wrong is we think about it and we give our mind a chance to process the whole concept of approaching them. And we think about it, we watch them for a little while, we think about what we're going to say when we actually meet them, we talk to them. What am I going to say to them? What are they going to think of me? How am I coming across? The whole thing, the whole what's going to happen when I talk to them, and you start thinking, well, what they're going to think of me, they're going to think I'm really an idiot. I've approached them and I've introduced myself, and then I've stopped talking, and now they're thinking, well, I've just put them in an awkward position because now my mind has gone blank and I don't know what to say now, and I'm relying on that person to do the talking. Maybe that's you. If you suffer from a blank mind, in anxiety-induced blank mind in these social settings. So whatever it is for you, whatever's stopping you, if you give it a chance to think about it when you're at stage 1, then it's almost inevitable that you're going to talk yourself out of it, isn't it? So it never happens. You see somebody, you'll love to talk to them, but you never do, because of all the things going on in your mind telling you what's going to go wrong when you actually do it. So stage 1 is all about getting moving before you can engage your brain and start thinking it through. And in previous live streams, I've used the example of Mel Robbins for this in her book, The 5-Second Rule. Now it's not an exclusive idea to her, but she took it to the next level. So it's nice that I use her example and plug her book a little bit if it's something that you'd like to read and get to know more about. It's that whole concept of taking action before you can actually think about it and talk yourself out of it. So in essence, it's You see something you want to do, or you have that idea. It doesn't have to be approaching and talking to somebody. It could be anything in life. You decide you want to do something, and you do a 5-second countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And as you reach 1, you just get moving. It's that simple. You just move. You get acting on that impulse, that thought, before you can logically think about it. And that is part 1. And then part 2 and part 3 are interchangeable. So part 2, it's about analysing the person's face. Sounds strange, right? But at stage 1, we've got ourselves moving towards that person. We're here, the person here, and we need to move from here to there. And we have an opportunity here to talk ourselves out of it, don't we, as we're approaching them. So part 2 is in part about throwing your attention out of your own mind and towards the person. So you put your attention at the person before you physically reach them. The idea being you've got your attention out of your own head, so you're not internally thinking about it and churning over those thoughts that could talk you out of it. But there's a bigger purpose here. When you're looking at the other person, as you're approaching them, you're looking for something. You're looking for a feature on their face, something that is outstanding about that person's face. Now, the reason why will become much more evident in part 5 in my next live stream. It's all about how to remember the person's face. So, we're approaching now in part 2, and we're trying to identify something significant about this person. Maybe their ears protrude, maybe they've got a big nose, a big forehead, a small chin, a scar, something significant, something notable, something a little bit different and unique about this person. And if they have nothing unique whatsoever, that's okay, because I'm putting together some training for you that you can go into a much deeper dive at the end of this series of live streams. And it's entirely free, of course, but it's there and it'll take you deeper into this whole idea. And so part 2 is the first stage of how to remember the person's name. Once you've introduced yourself and you've got into a conversation and they've given you their name. And isn't it just typical in life that you're so caught up on thinking about what you're going to say, the impression that you're giving, that you completely forget what that person's name is. And now you're in that situation where they're talking and using your name, but you've forgotten their name. And so now you're in the low ground in this conversation. So we bring that into this 5-stage process, how to remember the person's name. So this isn't now merely just how to approach somebody, but how to engage confidently with them once you're there. So part 2 is analysing the person's face as you're approaching them. Just a simple look at them. Instead of hoovering up the floor as you walk towards them, you look at their face and you're looking for something. You're trying to identify something about this person that is a little bit unique, a little bit different, a little bit stand out. Then part 3 is all about how you approach, the confidence of your body language. So if you're slouching and you're shuffling towards them, you've got low self-confidence and you feel it with your body language. So how you approach them is important. So you have to have a good straight upright body language and nice relaxed muscles. And you have to be, to be able to do part 2, you have to be looking forward. So you can't have your eyes cast down at the ground. You have to be looking forward, and you need to have that nice straight upright body language. Not just to feel confident, but to look confident as well. Because if this person has noticed you approaching and they see somebody shuffling forward with their shoulders down and eyes barely able to make contact, they're not going to feel confident about getting into a conversation with you. So even if, I hate the expression, but faking it till you make it, there's a little bit of that involved. But it's like when you're feeling sad and and you've got a frown on your face, if you force a smile onto your face, it changes your chemical composition, doesn't it? It forces you to feel better against your will. And it is the same with this. Given the right body language, nice, upright, straight body language, relaxed muscles, looking straight forward, it makes you feel more confident. And again, there's more to this than I can express in a live stream. And it will all be in the training if you want to get into it. And I'll leave a link in the description. Now we move on to stage 4, which is a very exciting stage in my mind. Excuse me. Because I call this conversation phase. So now you've actually approached the person and you've made contact, and you've said something to them. You've made a greeting. I mean, you can have some question already in mind before you even come to the event, whatever it is. If it's a networking event, obviously it's based on some sort of theme, whatever that event is about. Maybe you're into property investing and you're at a networking event for properties. So you're going to have a few opening questions related to property, and you can have those questions in mind before you even come to the event. Maybe there was a speaker at the event, and you can have a few questions based on the speaker. Does the other person know the speaker? How did they come to be at the event? How did they hear about it? You can come up with a few opening questions and memorize them before you even get to the event. So it shouldn't be any problem what to say to start the conversation. So you actually meet the person and you introduce yourself, and you start with what we call a closed question, which is just a yes/no answer. Just a question that the other person doesn't have to give a big explanation to. That's an open question. So we start with a closed question, and the conversation phase, or Facemap, is a memory technique, and it's based on the other person's face. So you start with a closed question, or the first part of an icebreaker question. So icebreaker, we start with the eyes. This is our memory trigger to start with an ice question, or an eyes. Eyes. You see what we're doing there? Ice, the first part of an icebreaker. So we start with a closed question, and we soon get a feeling if the other person is not really into having a conversation. Maybe they're waiting for somebody. So you just test the waters with a closed question to test or get a sense of whether they're up for a conversation. Their body language will tell you if they're not really up for a conversation, and you can just ask the question and then get a sense. And if they're not up for a conversation, then just politely leave them alone and move on. So we start with the closed ice question, and then we move forward, assuming that we get a sense that it's okay to carry on. We can move to a breaker question, and a breaker is more about an open question. So we've tested the waters with a closed question, and now we're going to break the conversation open with an open question. Make sense? And we represent an open question with the nose. So we think of the nose as a beak. So breaking open the nose, like imagine a bird with a big beak, and it's pecking at some frozen water. It's trying to break it open to get to the fish underneath the ice. Okay, so we started with the eyes, and now we move to the nose. Ice breaker. And we can have an open question in mind as well before we ever approach the person. And an open question, of course, if you're not completely familiar with these terminologies, an open question is a question that's designed to get a fuller response from the other person, rather than just a yes/no question. I mean, a yes or a no question or a close question is, simply, asking, do you know the person that was giving the presentation? If you're at a networking event, and they can simply say yes or no, and that's a closed question. But if you said, how do you know the person that's given the presentation, or how do you know the couple that are getting married if you're at a reception? Now you're having an open question, and the other person needs to give a fuller response. So that's the difference. So, icebreaker. And now we move down the conversation phase to the mouth. Because you've given an open question, and now the other person is speaking. And so you watch their mouth, because free information is flowing out of it. So you've broken the ice, and now you've got a waterfall of words. Imagine it like that. You've broken the ice, and now they're talking because you've given an open question and they're responding with words. And so the whole point is that you're not here trying to think about what to say next when they stop talking. Get out of your own mind and stop trying to think about, so they're talking about this, and how am I going to respond to it? Have I got any related stories that I can share based on what they're talking about? And you've got these thoughts in your head. They're going to stop talking, and it's going to be my turn to talk. And what am I going to talk about? So you need to stop doing that and get out of your own head. It's counterintuitive, but this is what you need to do. You need to actually just stop and listen to that free information coming out of their mouth. And what are you listening for? You're listening for hot buttons, or iceberg tips, as we call them. Information that you can latch onto and ask more about. So we're not thinking about what we're going to say. We're not going to talk about something in our own experience. We're going to follow up their free information by asking a question based on what they've just said. So you're at the mouth, you're watching it. It's a memory trigger just to tell you to stop and watch and listen for free information. And now we've come down from the eyes to the nose to the mouth, and now we're circling back up conversation face to the ears. Because as I said, we're listening for free information. We're listening for iceberg tips. So we use one ear to represent iceberg tips and one to represent hot buttons. So what's an iceberg tip? It's the tip of a piece of information, and there's a lot more information beneath the surface. So they may be talking, and they might just hint at something else in their dialogue. They might just touch upon something else that they're good at. They might be talking about the bride and groom, and they might just mention that something else that isn't entirely related to the subject, and it's called an iceberg tip. They're just showing the tip of a piece of information. And if you hear it, it's like, imagine just you're on a river, and you're going along with the rapids, and you see little rocks sticking out, and you need to steer around them, or there's something coming in the opposite direction, and it's not entirely with the flow of the conversation, and it's an iceberg tip. It sticks out of the water. It's noticeable because it's a little bit different, and it's something you can latch onto and ask them about when they stop talking. And that's the iceberg tip. And the hot button is when you're talking, or when they're talking, and the whole body language of the other person changes because you're getting onto a subject, or they're veering into a subject territory that they're very comfortable with and very confident with, and you can almost see them moving up a gear as they talk more rapidly and more confidently about this thing. But maybe because you're a new person to them, they don't really want to get into it and maybe bore you with it, because it's maybe not appropriate at that very early stage of getting to know somebody. And so they want to talk about it, but they just leave the door open for you to ask them more about it. I was once an engineer for an electric company, and mostly I would usually drive around all day, and I'd be on my own and visiting customers in their homes. And one day I had a trainee engineer with me, and he was a very silent guy, and he barely said a single thing for the whole few days that he was with me. And I was trying to talk and get a little bit of conversation going, which was quite a role reversal for me at the time. But I was having no success until somehow he managed to get onto the topic of poker, and suddenly his entire body language changed and he came to life almost before my eyes, and I touched on a hot button, something that was a hot button for him. It soon became clear that he was very much into something called hang and poker or something like that. I can't remember quite what it was called, but something like hang and poker. And he did online poker, I think, but it was a big thing for him, and I think it was in maybe his entire life outside of his job. I don't know, but I touched on that hot button and he was away and talking about it like crazy for the next couple of hours. And so that was a hot button, and I touched upon it. And if you sense when the other person is giving the free information and you sense something like a little flag, imagine it like that if you like, a little flag sticking out of their flow of conversation, their flow of words, something that is not strictly about the question that you asked. It's one of those things, like I said, you have to practice listening to be able to get more familiar and more in tune with hearing these little iceberg tips and hot buttons. And I promise you, when you do, when you start practicing your listening skills, you'll be able to hear these little tips that the other person is giving away. And what happens usually, we completely gloss over these things, we don't hear them, and we start talking about something, one of our own experiences, and the other person, well, they probably deliberately or subconsciously gave away an iceberg tip, or they showed an iceberg tip, hoping that you would latch onto it and ask them about it. And when you don't ask them about it, when you don't even notice, that person is a little bit disappointed. Imagine if you're in a first date with another person and you've asked your open question and they're talking and they've given this iceberg tip and they're hoping that you're going to ask them more about it, and so that you can get to know that person better, but you don't. You never even noticed it in the first place, and you start talking about yourself. How disappointed. What is that other person going to be thinking? They're going to be a little bit disappointed that they didn't get to talk about their thing, and now they're listening to you talking about yourself. And so by not listening and by being too much in our own head, we've put ourselves on the low ground in the conversation. So from getting from the eyes to the nose to the mouth, and from here to ears, we need to make sure that we're in listening mode. We're listening for the free information here. So that and the ears, they're just memory prompts as reminders of what we're listening for. So you've come from here and we've come around here on the Facemap, and the final stop on Facemap is the forehead. So let's say that you didn't pick up any hot buttons or iceberg tips. You didn't notice anything at all. Maybe they just gave the minimum information that they needed to. Maybe they're not really into a conversation, or maybe they're not natural conversationalists themselves. But maybe they just don't want to have a conversation. It could be anything, and it's up to you to pick up on those signals. And you will do as you get more practiced and you become a skilled conversationalist and a little bit more empathetic to being in the shoes of the other person and what they're feeling, because maybe they're anxious as well because they're talking to a strange person. It's not all about us. So stage 5 on conversation Facemap is the mind, and this is a little bit more deep, because let's say you have experiences of your own, you have your own stories, but your mind goes blank in these anxiety-inducing first conversations. So this is not really something I can go into depth with in this little live stream. I need to wrap it up. We're already 25 minutes in, but it will be included or we'll cover it in more detail in the training if you're into going for that training. But essentially, it's all about remembering or having storage. Think of it as a storage area for your own stories and experiences, which is exactly what it is really. It's a storage area. But like conversation, Facemap, which is in itself just a memory technique. So, closed question to test the waters of talking to a new person. Open question, the breaker, the big icebreaker. Closed question, open question to break open the conversation with an open question. Watch for the free information flowing from the other person's mouth as they respond to your open question. Ears to listen for those iceberg tips and hot buttons coming with their free information. And then we move back up to the forehead for our own stories, because it's not just about making the other person speak and asking them questions. Of course, we need to put our own input into the conversation and add an experience of our own. So that's where our own experiences lie, within our forehead, and it's a memory prompt to say, hey, look, imagine it's a little treasure chest of our own stories, and we put them in here. But of course, you've got to be able to memorize them or remember them or even create them. Because let's say the 10 most common topics that come up in a conversation. Number 1, what is your favourite film or show? Just a small talk question. What do you enjoy watching on TV? What's your favourite show? What's your favourite movie? And if somebody asked you that question cold, could you really come up with an answer there and then on the spot, or would you have to really think about it? Or would you just say the first movie that came to mind, and it's maybe not really your favourite movie at all? It's just the first one came to mind because you panicked and you needed to say something. And so you came out with a movie. Maybe you watched it recently, but it's not your favourite. And then that's it. That's conversation done. You give the title of your movie, and then you say, well, what about you? What's your favourite movie? And that's it. You've just killed stone dead an open question or an invite to open up the question. And so you can prepare answers to the 10 most common topics, and that's in another training. But I can talk about it in the training. And basically it's just about having these answers prepared in your mind. So think about, what's your favourite movie? Think about it in advance. For me, it was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner. There were so many funny one-liners in that movie. And I think it was the first movie that there was another actor in there that played alongside Kevin Costner. Can't think of his name off the top of my head. But I think it was the first movie I ever saw him in. Maybe it was his first movie, and it would be so much better if I could remember his name right now. But he's very famous, and I'm sure you can probably Google it, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and you'll know who I'm talking about. But the point is that if somebody asked me what my favourite movie is now, I could say that movie, and I could give a little bit of a backstory as to why it's my favourite movie. And I could talk about some of the actors in it. Alan Rickman, who played the sheriff. I could talk about the soundtrack. Bryan Adams, who sung the song as a background track to that movie. And that song in the 90s, it stayed at number 1 in the UK for about 16 weeks, and everyone was crazy. And I think in the end, it was Bryan Adams himself that took it down, removed it from the charts, because it was doing everyone's head in. But it was still staying at number 1, so people were buying it, and that's a little bit of a backstory answer that I could embellish my response with, or it's something I could use if the other person also liked that movie. So they've asked me, what's my favourite movie? And I say It's my favourite movie is this because, and then I can give a reason why. I can talk a little bit about the movie, not too much, maybe half a minute. I can talk about the movie, and then they could either say, well, yeah, that's great, I love that movie as well, and you can get into a conversation about it. Or they could talk about what their favourite movie is, and suddenly the conversation is just opening up because you knew in advance and you had a little story prepared for that common subject. And there's about 10 common subjects that come up in any conversation, and it's part of a training. And basically you need to have your own backstory prepared for each. I mean, another one is holidays. Where have you been on holiday? Where's your favourite place to go? What do you do travelling? What's your favourite music, etc.? These are common topic questions. And if you have something prepared in advance, or you know your own mind on these subjects in advance, instead of being caught off guard when somebody asks you, then you've got potential to open the conversation instead of just giving a one-word reply and then bouncing it back to the other person and killing the conversation dead, unless the other person has a presence of mind to be able to open the conversation up. So that's it for the mind, having your own stories formulated, your own experiences. Let's say a previous experience is just a block of clay, a lump of clay. All you need to do is find them out and just polish them up, chip away at the edges and create an image out of it. And you've got your own stories in your own mind embedded there. And that's your own mind. That's your own storage area for your stories, which on the conversation Facemap is part 5. It's your own contributions to the conversation. And then let's say you want to go for a second circuit of the conversation Facemap. So you might ask a closed question, an open question, listen to their response again. Reminders for listening for iceberg tips and hot buttons, and then giving your own story in response. Of course, it's quite a formulaic thing. But, and of course, a conversation is not going to go step by step like that. It's not paint by numbers. But at least when you get lost in the conversation, you've got the other person's face to bring your focus back. Where am I? The other person is talking. Where are you in this conversational process? And you can, the other person is talking. They're telling me stuff. I'm at the mouth. I should be listening for the free information. I should be listening for the iceberg tips. That's where I am on conversation Facemap. You see how it's working? Facemap. It's a memory technique, and each stage on the face is just a memory prompt. So you ask a closed question and then you panic and think, what do I do next? Oh, the nose is part 2 on Facemap. I should be asking an open question to try and break this thing open and get the other person talking more, because now you're in command. But of course the other person might ask you an open question, and of course then you're in a conversation. So that's Facemap. And if you want to get into the training that I will provide for you, then you'll see it written down, and you'll be able to just, if your preferred learning method is actually reading it or seeing it on the screen, then you'll be able to see it in that way rather than me just talking about it. So I'm going to wrap up the live stream now. I've gone on for 35 minutes, which is crazy. In real life, I'm that person that doesn't talk much on these live streams. I don't seem to be able to stop myself. So let's wrap it up there. And the next and final live stream for this 5-part series is remembering names. So you remember at part 2, we analyse the person's face and we look for something about them that was outstanding. Part 5 will bring that together. Part 5 will make part 2 make sense. Okay, so tune in for that live stream next time. Thanks for listening.